But we must start with some breaking news in the last hour. Pope Francis has died at the age of 88. The Vatican has released this statement. Dearest brothers and sisters, with deep sorrow, I must announce the death of our Holy Father Francis. At 7:35 this morning, the Bishop of Rome, Francis, returned to the house of the Father. His entire life was dedicated to the service of the Lord and his church. He taught us to live the values of the gospel with fidelity, courage and universal love, especially in favour of the poorest and most marginalised. Pope Francis appeared only yesterday to bless crowds of thousands of people in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican for Easter Sunday. It was a surprise appearance. As I was saying, it was a surprise appearance. He'd been recovering from a serious bout of double pneumonia and was admitted to hospital with bronchitis on February the 14th. He was there for 5 weeks before being seen again in public. He became Pope in 2013 after the resignation of Benedict XVI.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's sort of, now you see that clip, and which we probably, most of us saw yesterday, and now the poignancy of knowing he was dying and the fact that it was Easter Sunday, you know, such an important date in the religious calendar. So kind of well done him for making his last appearance.
Clearly his sense of duty was there right until the end, Lynn. He was trying to reach that huge audience of people on the most significant day probably of the Catholic Church's year, and to be there clearly weakened, but it was obviously something that was so important for him to do.
Yeah, obviously I'm assuming, but he probably felt his time was soon and he wanted to really push for this Easter few words that he was able to say, and I think that's a real dedication. You know, it probably was quite strenuous for him to do so, quite daunting for the simple fact of having to endure 2 bouts of pneumonia, but he still mustered up that courage to come and address the crowd, and, you know, not just the crowd, many viewers probably watching that, where this is so important to them, again, in the Christian calendar. So
we're watching live shots there of the Vatican, of St. Peter's Square.
So beautiful.
It is, and presumably people will be gathering as they find out the news throughout the day. We'll see more and more paying their tributes to the Pope. Let's speak now, though, to Anne Widdicombe. Anne, as a practising Catholic, you know, you probably have a better perspective than many of us on just how significant the impact was of Pope Francis.
It was a very significant impact. I mean, his pontifical reign started in, if you like, controversy when the previous Pope resigned, something that hadn't happened in many, many centuries. But the election was very straightforward. It was moderately quick. And he immediately showed a very different approach, not wanting to live in the palace, going out and embracing the feet of people in the crowd. He wanted to show a different approach and a different style of leadership. And that was what he did. And now his successor will face enormous challenges. We've got a war-torn world. But on the other hand, we also have a world in which the most recent generation is starting to show a renewed interest in religion, in Christianity. And that will be something that whoever succeeds him will have to build on.
His focus was very much on those who lived in poverty, those who were hungry as well. Was that a message that made sense at that time for the Catholic Church, for the 1.4 billion people who practice the Catholic faith?
I think it's a message that is timeless. It's a message that's always been at the right time, looking after the poor and needy. And when you consider that a vast quantity of those millions and millions, and indeed over 1 billion people who practice Catholicism, don't live in the West. They don't live in comfort. They don't live just assuming there'll be food on the table and a leak-proof roof over their heads. And so it was a very, very important message. Now, John Paul II fulfilled that message by being a missionary-style pope. He travelled and he travelled and he travelled. This pope, who took over when he was much older, has done it largely, not exclusively, but largely from Rome.
And, of course, he was from Latin America, the first pope from Latin America. We have to now go through a process which perhaps we are more familiar than we've ever been with before because of conclave. And it presumably for the Catholic Church, it's another opportunity for introspection, for self-examination and working out exactly what the needs are of that huge flock right now.
Yes, I mean, it is going to be a big challenge, but then becoming Pope is always a big challenge, as you rightly say, and I couldn't help laughing. Because of conclave, because of Rolf Fiennes, we've now got a very much clearer idea of the processes that will be involved. They can be very quick or they can be very long. You can get black smoke after black smoke. If you remember what happens when the Pope is being elected, they send up black smoke to say no result. They send up white smoke when we've got a new Pope. So it's going to be a very interesting time for everybody. It's going to be a challenging time for Catholics.
I mean, the Pope Francis used his last days incredibly effectively, didn't he? To be able to address that huge audience on Easter Sunday and also meeting with J.D. Vance as well. Those two actions now, in retrospect, seem like very significant, very important things to do.
Yes, I think the travelling in the Pope-mobile through St. Peter's Square was amazing. Now that we know just how close to death he was, that was absolutely amazing. One remembers John Paul II, who was very severely ill. He went right on to the end, as did this Pope, was very severely ill, shaking with with Parkinson's, with his last illness, as he delivered his address. And now I think we'll remember this Pope literally within hours of death, actually going through St. Peter's Square. And as you say, taking the time and the energy that it must have taken also, because he would have to have been thinking about everything he was saying, meeting Vance.
Yeah, very present right until the end. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Anne. And yes, very important, and with a unique perspective probably on the news that we're finding out this morning, that Pope Francis died in the early hours.